really easy, and I was like, I don't need to change my voice, I'm not like, it's just me. Physically, like, yeah, I put on a little weight, or I was like little things where it's like, I'm not gonna show up and be super like lean and tan because he's a chef, he doesn't care. I want him to feel like he's not trying too hard, you want him to feel safe, and you want him to feel comfortable, you want him to feel like someone who doesn't need anything, he's secure, he's not trying to sound too smart or look too good, he's just there.
I kept everything grounded and natural because the whole idea behind the character was simplicity. He's not trying to impress anyone, not trying to look perfect, not trying to sound overly intelligent. He's a chef, someone who lives in the moment, someone who doesn't care about fitting into a polished image. Maybe he's put on a little weight, maybe he's not camera ready, but that's exactly what makes him believable. He feels safe, calm, and secure, like someone who doesn't need approval. And honestly, that same contrast between authenticity and image is exactly what we're seeing play out in this legal situation in New York right now, where perception, narrative, and reality are all colliding in a very public way. So let's break this down properly, because a lot has happened and people are only seeing headlines without understanding what actually went down. Recently, a judge denied a motion filed by Blake Lively, where she was trying to get attorney Brian Friedman sanctioned. Now, if you don't understand what that means, basically she was asking the court to punish him for statements he made outside of the courtroom. These were interviews, public comments, media appearances where he spoke about her credibility, and her role in this entire situation. Her legal team argued that those statements crossed a line and violated professional conduct rules, specifically rules that limit what attorneys can say publicly about ongoing cases. And this wasn't a small filing. This was long, detailed, packed with examples. They went through multiple instances where Friedman allegedly attacked her character. They claimed he called her dishonest, suggested she was afraid of the truth, described her as privileged and manipulative, and even implied that her claims were manufactured because she couldn't handle public criticism. They painted a picture of an attorney who wasn't just defending his client, but actively trying to destroy her reputation in the media. Now here's where it gets more serious. They didn't just ask for a warning, they asked for real consequences. We're talking financial penalties, attorney fees, public reprimand, and even the possibility of removing him from the case entirely. That last part is huge, because if that happened, it would completely shift the balance of the case. Losing your lead attorney in a high-profile legal battle is not a small thing. And on top of that, they also left the door open for future action, basically saying if he continues this behavior, they could push for even harsher penalties later. So clearly, this wasn't just about stopping a few comments. This was a strategic move. It was about control of the narrative, control of the media, and control of how this case is being perceived by the public. But then comes the judge's response, and this is where everything flips. Instead of a long, detailed breakdown, the judge issued a very short order. And that alone already tells you something. When a judge responds briefly to a very long and detailed motion, it usually means they didn't find the argument strong enough to require deep analysis. The key issue the judge focused on was timing, not the tone of the statements, not the wording, not even whether they technically violated the rules, just timing. He basically said, even if we assume those statements were not protected, there is still no evidence that they would have any real impact on a jury. And why? because they were made months before the trial. We're talking about statements made almost a year in advance. And in the court's view, that's simply too far removed to realistically influence jurors when the time comes. And that's it. That's the core reason the motion was denied. Think about that for a second. Pages and pages of accusations, multiple examples, strong language, serious requests for punishment, and the judge doesn't even need to address most of it. He just says, "You haven't shown me how this actually harms the legal process." And that right there is the biggest takeaway, because in court, it's not about how dramatic something sounds. It's not about how many examples you can list. It's about whether you can prove real impact. And in this case, the judge made it clear that there was no proof that these statements would prejudice a jury or interfere with the fairness of the trial. What's also interesting is that the judge didn't even rule on whether Friedman's statements violated the professional conduct rules. He didn't say they were okay, and he didn't say they were wrong. He simply said it doesn't matter for this motion because there's no demonstrated harm. That's a very important detail because it shows that the court is staying focused on practical consequences, not theoretical arguments. Now let's zoom out a bit because this case isn't happening in isolation. It's happening in the public eye with media coverage, interviews, social media discussions, and constant narrative building from both sides. And that's where things get complicated. Because both sides are not just fighting in court, they're also fighting in the court of public opinion. Statements are being made, stories are being shaped, and each side is trying to present themselves in the best possible light while discrediting the other. The defense team even pointed out that they've been on the receiving end of public attacks as well. So from their perspective, this isn't one-sided. It's a back and forth where both sides are engaging with the media. And that raises a bigger question. Where do you draw the line between defending your client and influencing public perception? Because attorneys do have the right to speak, especially when it comes to defending their clients against public accusations. But at the same time, there are rules meant to prevent those statements from interfering with a fair trial. And in this situation, the judge basically said whatever line may or may not have been crossed, it hasn't been shown to actually affect the trial. Now let's talk about strategy, because this is where things get really interesting. Filing a motion like this isn't just a legal move, it's also a strategic move. It creates headlines. It shapes the narrative. It sends a message. When you file a motion accusing the opposing attorney of misconduct, that becomes a story. Media outlets pick it up. People start discussing it. It can shift public perception even before the court makes a decision. And in some cases, that might be part of the goal. Because even if the motion is denied, the narrative has already been pushed out into the world. The idea has already been planted. But in this case, the judge's response kind of cuts through all of that. By keeping the ruling short and focused, it sends a message that the court is not interested in being part of that narrative battle. The court is focused on one thing: evidence of actual harm, and without that, none of the rest matters. This also ties into a bigger point about how legal filings work. Just because something is written in a legal document doesn't mean it's proven fact. It doesn't mean it's true. It just means it's being claimed. And that's something a lot of people forget. Legal documents can include strong language, serious accusations, and detailed narratives. But until those claims are tested and proven, they remain claims. And the judge in this case has already reminded everyone of that multiple times, emphasizing that filings should not automatically be treated as truth. Now, from the defense perspective, this is clearly a win. Their attorney stays on the case. There are no sanctions, no fines, no restrictions, and no immediate consequences for the statements that were made. It also gives them more confidence moving forward because it shows that the court is not easily swayed by pressure or public arguments. But at the same time, this doesn't end anything. The case is still ongoing. There will be more motions, more rulings, more developments. And if anything, this just sets the tone for what's to come. It shows that the court is going to require strong, clear evidence for any serious action. It shows that arguments need to be grounded in actual impact, not just perception. And it shows that while the public side of this case may be loud and dramatic, the court is approaching it in a much focused and controlled way. So moving forward, the big question is how both sides adjust. Does one side pull back on public statements, or do they continue as before, knowing that the court isn't likely to intervene without clear evidence of harm? Do we see more aggressive legal strategies or a shift toward more traditional courtroom arguments? Because at the end of the day, that's where this will be decided, not in interviews, not in headlines, but in court, where evidence matters more than narrative. And right now, based on this decision, one thing is very clear. A big move was made. A lot of effort was put in. A strong narrative was built. But when it came time for the court to evaluate it, the foundation just wasn't strong enough. And that's exactly why the motion was denied. And this moment right here might actually be more important than people realize, because it sets a precedent for how future arguments in this case are going to be treated. It tells both sides that if you come to the court, you better come with something solid, not just something that sounds powerful and emotional. Because the judge has already shown that he is not interested in being pulled into media narratives or public pressure. He is only interested in what can actually be proven inside the courtroom, and that changes everything going forward. Because now every next move, every next filing, every next argument will be judged under that same lens of proof over perception. And that's where this case becomes even more interesting, because if one side continues to rely on public narrative without strong legal backing, they risk facing the same kind of outcome again and again, while the other side, if they stay focused on evidence and timing, could continue to gain small but important wins like this one. At time, those small wins can build momentum. And in legal battles, momentum matters a lot because it shapes confidence, strategy, and even settlement discussions. And another important detail here is how the timing argument could be used again in the future. Because if statements made far away from trial are not considered harmful, then it gives more room for both sides to speak publicly, as long as they are not directly interfering with the immediate fairness of the proceedings. And that opens the door for even more media involvement, more interviews, more public statements, and more narrative building, which means this case is not going to quiet down anytime soon. In fact, it might get louder because now there is a clearer understanding of what the court will and will not tolerate. And that's why this decision is not just a simple denial. It's actually a signal. It's the judge quietly telling both sides how to play this game properly. And if you read between the lines, it becomes obvious that emotional arguments, dramatic filings, and public pressure tactics are not going to be enough on their own. And that's something a lot of people watching from the outside don't fully understand. Because from the public perspective, it often feels like whoever tells the better story wins. But inside the courtroom, it's a completely different world, where structure, evidence, and timing matter far more than headlines and opinions. And this case is becoming a perfect example of that difference between public perception and legal reality. And as we move forward, it will be very interesting to see whether the strategies change or whether both sides double down on what they've been doing so far. Because if they continue on the same path, then we can expect more clashes, more filings, and more moments like this where the court steps in and draws a clear line between what matters and what doesn't. And for now, this moment belongs to the defense, because they walked away without penalties, without restrictions, and with their position intact, while the other side is left to rethink their approach. and figure out what their next move should be. Because one thing is certain, this case is far from over, and the real battle is still ahead. And when it finally reaches the courtroom, that's when everything will truly be tested, not in public statements, not in media narratives, but in front of a judge and possibly a jury where only one thing will matter: what can actually be proven and what cannot. And that is where the final outcome will be decided.